Hello and welcome to the Sixth Floor Museum located in Dallas, Texas on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and his legacy. President John Fitzgerald Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas on November 22nd in 1963. This was the fourth presidential assassination in American history, the first in the nuclear age. The sudden death of the leader of the strongest nation in the free world sent shockwaves around the globe. After President Kennedy's death, American leaders moved swiftly to effect an orderly transfer of power and calm international fear of possible nuclear war. Subsequent legislation clarified the manner of presidential succession. Attempts to solve the crime were confounded by the murder of the prime suspect before he could be brought to trial. Official explanations were met with skepticism by the public. The assassination launched a flood of controversy that lingers today. JFK's death cut short his presidency after only 1,000 days in office. It was necessary for others to carry forward his programs. Historians debate Kennedy's brief record of achievement, but clearly he made a profound impression on many people around the world. His legacy includes the promise of what might have been. A new generation. John F. Kennedy's inaugural address was a clarion call for public commitment. The new generation was, in Kennedy's words, born in this century, tempered by war, proud of our ancient heritage. His New Frontier program was a set of promises and a set of challenges for Americans of all ages and walks of life to get involved with the country and to rediscover a national purpose. The response from American youth was particularly dramatic. During the early 1960s, they took Kennedy at his word, entering public service and began to show interest in the nation and overall human condition. Although students are traditionally restless, those in the Eisenhower era had been labeled the silent generation. During the late 50s, there were hints of rebellion in the writings of Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, and satirical preaching by comedian Mort Sahl, and images of anger symbolized by actor Marlon Brando in a t-shirt and leather jacket. But American youth during the Kennedy era was not particularly rebellious. Most young people were preoccupied with Elvis Presley, rock and roll music, and the twist. Camelot opened on Broadway. Moviegoers reveled in images of Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Taylor, and art critics debated the merits of pop art. Social protest music began slowly to gain in popularity. Laws and theological traditions changed to meet the demands of the times. Color television, air conditioners, and clothes dryers were innovations in most American homes. Fast food, though, was not yet a staple in the national diet. During the early 1960s, secretaries converted to the new IBM Selectric typewriter, and camera buffs tried Polaroid color film. Most laymen pondered the implications of lasers, quasars, ICBMs, tetracyclines, birth control pills, DNA, and the first mechanical heart. In 1963, there were about 4,000 computers in the U.S. The Kennedy White House. The Kennedy family introduced a youthful spirit to the White House, and the nation followed their activities avidly. The New Frontier White House became identified with sophistication, high fashion, cocktails, and superb entertainment that were signatures of the Kennedy era. The Kennedys and the arts became synonymous during the early 1960s. Earlier efforts to create a national cultural center were continued, and youth performances at the White House promoted artistic endeavors by America's young people. Leading artists performed at official dinners, and Jacqueline Kennedy placed the redecoration of the executive mansion at the national spotlight. Kennedy created the nucleus of the National Endowments for both the arts and the humanities, and John F. Kennedy's popularity with the media proved helpful in keeping him in the public eye. Americans enjoyed his wit, and although many did not endorse the New Frontier program, there was a general fascination with Kennedy's energetic approach to the presidency. He tapped a broad range of talent to assist him in inaugurating an era of change. In economic programs during Kennedy's presidency, the nation's economy flourished. Economist Walter Heller, chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, induced federal deficits at a time of economic growth to overcome high unemployment. A radical departure from the balanced budget of the previous administration, the deficit was $8 billion in January 1963. The administration moved against the threat of recession in 1961 by introducing the first major minimum wage law since 1938. In 1962, the Trade Expansion Act was designed to boost exports and aid the economy. A sweeping 1963 tax reduction program was passed by Kennedy's successor, Lyndon B. Johnson. American business generally viewed Kennedy's policies as anti-business and criticized the president for pressuring the steel industry into repealing the price increase in 1962. For social programs, massive new social programs were central to Kennedy's New Frontier philosophy. He introduced legislation to combat mental retardation and improve health, education, and housing. Many programs were stalled in the conservative Congress, though, and the administration provided the foundation for Medicare and the Mass Transportation Act and the War on Poverty. The Wilderness Act of 1964 protected vast American natural resources and fostered interest in conservation. Two 1961 international programs, the Peace Corps and the Alliance for Progress, brought American knowledge and technology to underdeveloped nations. The Peace Corps encouraged Americans to volunteer in foreign countries. The Lancia Peril del Progreso, a massive 10-year economic and social aid program for Latin America, was less successful and did not live up to expectations. The reception in Dallas. Dallas was the most conservative city on the president's Texas itinerary. Kennedy's sweeping civil rights bill, introduced in 1963, would doubtless have cost him millions of votes, particularly in the South. National polls taken on November 1963 showed that the president's popularity had fallen to a 59% rating. In the 9 months prior to the Texas trip, John F. Kennedy received over 400 death threats nationwide. In 1963, Dallas had a metropolitan population of 1 million and was the business and financial center of the state. The city voted Republican in the 1960 election. Small extremist groups were vocal in the community, and well-known conservative spokesman Major General Edwin Walker had moved his base of operations to Dallas. And on October 24th, 1963, United Nations Ambassador Adlai Stevenson was spat upon and hit in the head with a placard while he was in Dallas for a United Nations Day speech. The national climate and the widely publicized Stevenson incident moved some presidential advisors to express serious concerns about John F. Kennedy's visit to Dallas. Community leaders apologized to Stevenson and called for a dignified reception for President Kennedy. Security arrangements in the city were extensive. Tickets to a large bipartisan luncheon at the Dallas Trade Mart were in great demand. On November 22nd, the general mood of Dallas became apparent when nearly 250,000 citizens came out to watch the motorcade and give their enthusiastic welcome to the President of the United States. Turmoil at home. The drive for racial equality matured during the early 1960s. Violence broke out in the South in 1961 during restaurant sit-ins and Alabama freedom rides. Civil rights leaders urged the president to introduce legislation to end discrimination. Kennedy hesitated. President Kennedy lacked support in the Congress, so for 2 years he took positive action through the executive branch of government by enforcing court-ordered desegregation, pushing for the elimination of discriminatory poll taxes, appointing blacks to more government jobs, and creating the Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity. In 1962 and 1963, the administration sent federal troops to force integration at the University of Mississippi and the University of Alabama. On June 19, 1963, Kennedy submitted an omnibus civil rights bill, the largest since Reconstruction, to the Congress. On August 28, a crowd of 250,000 held a peaceful civil rights demonstration in Washington, D.C. Many Southern conservatives opposed the Civil Rights Bill. Kennedy's popularity fell in national opinion polls. Left and right-wing extremist groups were another source of domestic turmoil. The left wing decided Kennedy's efforts to oppose communism around the world with arms if necessary as warmongering. Ultra-conservatives, though, believed Kennedy was soft on communism and condemned his civil rights program. Labor leaders and organized crime were angered by the Justice Department's aggressive program against the mob and its influence on American labor unions. The Red Threat. Kennedy's presidency was dominated by the Cold War, a delicate balance of power between the world's two nuclear giants, the Soviet Union and the United States. The Soviets' launching of Sputnik 1 on October 1957 placed the Russians ahead in space, and the administration feared communist threats in Cuba, Berlin, and Southeast Asia, and other parts of the world. The Kennedy administration committed to halt the global spread of communism, promoted the largest peacetime defense built up in history. Confrontations came in 1961 when Kennedy approved an abortive CIA-backed invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs and overprotection of West Berlin. In 1962, the president successfully forced the Soviets to remove offensive missile sites from Cuba, and critics from the left and right denounced Kennedy as either too hard or too soft on communism. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, though, Soviet-American relationships began to thaw. A nuclear test ban treaty with the Soviets was signed in 1963. John F. Kennedy considered the treaty his greatest achievement. During the same year, a hotline to Moscow was installed and Americans approved wheat sales to Russia. Ultra-conservatives condemned these early movements towards détente. The space race. Troubled by the Soviet domination in space after the launch of Sputnik 1 in 1957, John F. Kennedy took steps after his inauguration to speed up American exploration of space. He named Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson as chairman of the National Space Council and asked Congress to channel billions of dollars into a new space program designed to place an American on the moon within a decade. His major commitment to space exploration boosted American technology and led the first American manned spaceflight by Alan Shepard in 1961. It was the first orbital flight by John Glenn in 1962, and these Project Mercury flights were followed by the August 1962 launch of an unmanned space probe designed to travel past Venus. Kennedy signed the Satellite Communications Act in 1962. In July, the first Telstar satellite created by Bell Labs relayed television programs between the United States and Europe. Telstar increased our American presence in international communications. The new satellite and space technology was applied to other fields, including medicine, metal fabrication, and weapons research. The corner window. The Texas Book School Book Depository immediately became an area of investigation as the site from which shots were fired at the motorcade. At least 5 witnesses said that they had seen a rifle protruding from the upper window. So within minutes, police ordered the building sealed and began a search for evidence. A roll call of depository personnel took place at 1:03 p.m. and revealed several missing employees, including the order clerk named Lee Harvey Oswald. A search for him began at 1:12 p.m. and police looked behind a wall of boxes in the southeast corner window area on the 6th floor of the building and found a perch of cartons, 3 spent cartridge shells, and a brown paper bag. At 1:22 p.m., a rifle mounted with a telescopic sight and an ammunition clip were found among boxes in the northwest corner of the same floor, the 6th floor of the depository building. A later fingerprint analysis of the sniper's perch indicated that some of the boxes and the paper bag contained a finger and palm prints of the depository employee Lee Harvey Oswald, who had been hired on October 15th. Ownership of the rifle was also traced to Oswald, who was seen on the 6th floor about 35 minutes before the shooting. The race to Parkland. After shots rang out, the limousine sped 4 miles to Parkland Hospital, one of the leading trauma centers in the nation. It arrived at the emergency entrance at 12:36 p.m., passing the Trade Mart en route. Experienced trauma teams took the injured president and governor to trauma rooms 1 and 2. For security reasons, Vice President Johnson was taken to the minor medicine section of the hospital. Over a dozen doctors worked to revive the president, who was observed to have a massive head wound and a small frontal wound in his lower neck. After a priest gave last rites, JFK was pronounced dead at 1 p.m. Governor Connolly was taken to surgery where doctors operated for 4 hours to repair wounds in his back, chest, right wrist, and left thigh. His wrist and rib were fractured. In 1963, presidential assassination was not a federal crime. Therefore, the murder fell legally under local jurisdiction. An autopsy, a mandatory procedure in violent deaths, was thought to be too time-consuming by security personnel guarding President Lyndon B. Johnson. They feared a conspiracy that included a new president as a target. Johnson refused to leave Dallas, though, without Mrs. Kennedy, who would not leave without her husband's body. When local authorities stood firm on the autopsy, Secret Service men and Kennedy staffers forcibly removed Kennedy's remains. The oath of office. Lyndon B. Johnson became the President of the United States upon JFK's death at 1 p.m. Fearing a widespread conspiracy, government aides urged Johnson to return immediately to D.C. Johnson left the Parkland Hospital at 1:26 p.m. for Air Force One, which had better security and communication facilities. Upon learning that Mrs. Kennedy would not leave Dallas without her husband's remains, he waited until his casket was aboard Air Force One. Federal District Judge Sarah Hughes administered the oath of office to him as the 36th President of the United States, reaffirming the commitment to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. Mrs. Kennedy attended the swearing-in, which took place in the presidential cabin on the plane. As soon as it was over, Johnson issued the order for takeoff, and the plane left for Washington, D.C. The nation and world respect. As telecommunications flashed in the news worldwide, people everywhere reacted with shock and then grief. Cars stopped on streets, office workers clamored to find radios and television sets to confirm the horrible rumors. It was the first American presidential assassination since 1901. We just didn't believe the assassination anymore, exclaimed one shocked British television commentator. Foreigners rushed to American embassies to express their condolences. Churches opened their doors for prayer. Special events were canceled everywhere. The city of Dallas shut down. "We are a tormented town," said one civic leader. Citizens placed hundreds of memorial tributes in Dealey Plaza. In Washington, D.C., the Kennedys and government leaders made funeral preparations for the fallen head of state. Even before official notices were sent, scores of world leaders wired the State Department that they would attend the ceremonies in the Capitol on Monday, November 25th. President Johnson declared this as a national day of mourning. A national survey showed that the assassination caused more than two-thirds of American people to experience some physical symptoms of illness and emotional distress. At home and abroad, most compared the loss of American president to that of a family member or close friend. Oswald and Ruby. World attention focused again on Dallas when Lee Harvey Oswald was shot in the basement of the Dallas Police Headquarters on Sunday, November 24th, 1963. Coupled with the president's assassination 2 days earlier, Oswald's public death while in public custody prompted an anger towards Dallas, a stigma that lasted for decades. The New York Times proclaimed the city not too many decades removed from the vigilante tradition of the old frontier. The man responsible for the first murder broadcast live on American television was local nightclub owner Jack Ruby, a Chicago native known for his violent temper and erratic behavior. Ruby had childhood ties to organized crime. Although mob-related conspiracy theories persist, evidence suggests that Ruby acted alone. His motives remain shrouded in doubt. His 1964 trial was heralded at the time as the trial of the century. The jury's verdict, guilty of murder with malice, was overturned on appeal. While awaiting a new trial outside of Dallas, Ruby was incarcerated on the 6th floor of the Dallas County Jail in Dealey Plaza. The witnesses. Although crowds had thinned out at the end of the parade, there were hundreds of people in Dealey Plaza who either heard or saw the John F. Kennedy. For the first time in history, over 24 people recorded such a tragic event on film. Most were amateur photographers who had come to welcome President Kennedy and to make a photographic record of his visit to Dallas. Seeing the president's violent death was traumatic, and some believed they were going to get shot themselves. Echo patterns in Dealey Plaza made it difficult for most witnesses to determine the origin or number of shots, which sounded at first like firecrackers. Witnesses stated that they heard 1 to 8 more shots. Many heard 3, coming from various locations in Dealey Plaza. One distinct group thought shots came from the Texas School Book Depository, and 5 saw a rifle at that location. Another group said shots came from the fenced area atop the garden on the north side of Elm Street, later named the Grassy Knoll. A few thought shots came from more than one location. The Warren Commission used the interviews of 171 witnesses. Others came forward later, while some have always declined to discuss the tragedy. Testimony taken immediately after the assassination was generally the most objective, since witnesses were not influenced by the massive news reporting that followed. Pandemonium and the press. Broadcast news and global satellite communications came of age with Kennedy's assassination. For the first time, regular programming was preempted for continuous news coverage, and thousands of journalists worked tirelessly to report the weekend's incredible events to an international audience of 3 billion people. Major networks used over 2,100 people, excluding affiliates, to cover that weekend, and lost up to $40 million from canceled commercials. The average American watched 32 hours of television, with over 96% of the sets tuned in to news. Newspaper sales were up 21% on Friday afternoon, 17% on Saturday. In Dallas, the initial 70-man presidential press corps swelled to over 300 by Friday night, hopelessly overcrowding Dallas police headquarters. Reporters shouted questions at law enforcement officials and the major suspect, and then hastily filed reports. Despite an offer of local legal assistance from the Dallas Bar Association, Oswald spent the weekend without legal counsel. Officials were concerned that the press reports might interfere with Oswald's right to due process. Order broke down completely on Sunday morning when local nightclub owner Jack Ruby emerged from the jumble of press in the basement of police headquarters and shot Oswald, who was in the process of being transferred to the county jail. The shooting was carried live on NBC television, another first. Oswald died of his injuries, and later the Warren Commission called for safeguards against press interference in investigations, as well as the assurances of protection of suspects' civil liberties. A suspect apprehended. At about 12:32 p.m., a Dallas police officer stopped Lee Harvey Oswald, age 24, on the second floor of the depository building and released him when he was identified as an employee of the company. At 1:16 p.m., while investigators were gathering evidence on the 6th floor that would later be tied to Oswald, the police received word that patrolman J.D. Tibbet had been shot in Oak Cliff. Tippit was dead on arrival in Dallas's Methodist Hospital. Witnesses in Oak Cliff led police to the Texas Theater, a movie house where Oswald, armed with a .38 revolver, was arrested at 1:50 p.m. During a scuffle, Oswald tried to shoot one of the arresting officers. Police then searched his residence in Oak Cliff and Irving and found materials related to the ex-Marine's defection and residence in the Soviet Union. A native of New Orleans, Oswald had been active in establishing New Orleans chapter of the leftist Fair Play for Cuba Committee earlier in 1963. He and his Russian-born wife Marina lived intermittently in the Dallas-Fort Worth area during 1962 to 1963. Investigators and the media immediately began to assemble a portrait of the suspect as a disgruntled left-wing loner. Oswald said he was innocent of both murders at the time of his arrest for Tippit's death. Oswald was being sought for questioning by the Dallas police about the Kennedy assassination. In a roll call of employees at the depository taken at 1:03 p.m., he was discovered missing. Lee Harvey Oswald, alias Alec Hidell, or O.H. Lee, was arraigned for Officer Tippit's murder on Friday night. Authorities stated that the arraignment formally charged him with John F. Kennedy's death that took place on Saturday morning. The investigations. On November 29th, 1963, President Johnson created the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy, chaired by Chief Justice of the United States Earl Warren. The Commission's report and 26 volumes of testimony and exhibits were released in September and October 1964. The conclusion? Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone, killed the president. Accepted at first, the report's inconsistencies later launched a controversy that led 2 decades of inquiry. Between 1966 and 1978, there were 4 separate federal-level examinations of the medical evidence. Collectively, they confirmed that the president was hit by 2 shots fired from behind and revealed that the commissions had erred in the placement of his wounds. 2 probes into intelligence activities in the mid-70s disclosed that FBI, CIA, and Secret Service had all withheld information from the Warren Commission. Public demand for an independent congressional investigation increased. Between 64 and 76, hundreds of books and articles criticized the Warren Report were published. Conspiracy theories flourished. In 1975, American audiences saw the enhancement of the 8mm film of the assassination recorded by Abraham Zapruder. A backward motion of the president's head suggested a shot from the front. In 1976, Congress created the House Select Committee on Assassinations to investigate the Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. slayings. In 1978, the House Committee supported the 1964 finding that Oswald killed the president, but concluded that he was part of a plot. The committee ruled that an acoustical evidence from the scene established a 95% probability that 2 gunmen fired at the motorcade. 2 more government-sponsored acoustical studies in 1980 and 1982 refuted the House Committee's findings. In 1988, the Justice Department announced that there were no persuasive evidence of a conspiracy and formally closed the Kennedy and King investigations. The evidence. Photograph and acoustical. The Warren Commission used some enhancement techniques to examine the photographic evidence, but scientific advances after 1964 enabled the House Committee to use new technology to evaluate visual evidence associated with the assassination. The committee also analyzed a dictabelt tape recording the sounds transmitted from a policeman's motorcycle in Dealey Plaza. At the approximate time of the assassination, scientific panels were convened for the work. The Warren Commission examined approximately 510 visuals during the investigations, and the House Committee evaluated these, plus an autopsy, photographs and x-rays, and some additional photographs of the assassination not made public in 1964. The House Committee also benefited from independent scientific work that had been done to clarify the Zapruder film. It used new chemical processes and photographic digital enhancement techniques. An independent scientific firm hired by the House Committee examined the police tape and conducted the reenactment of the shooting on August 20th, 1978. Shots fired from the 6th-floor window and the grassy knoll were recorded by microphones in Dealey Plaza. This test, together with the refined analysis by acoustic scientists at Queens College, led to the determination that the dictabelt tape had recorded 4 gunshots at the time of the assassination. Shots 1, 2, and 4 came from the 6th-floor window with a 95% probability that the 3rd shot came from behind the fence at the grassy knoll. This was the main factor in leading the House Committee to conclude that the assassination was part of a conspiracy. These acoustic analyses were questioned in 1980 after testing by the FBI and discounted in 1982 by a panel convened at the National Academy of Sciences. The Justice Department also discounted the tests done for the House Committee when it officially closed the investigation in 1988. The evidence, forensic, and ballistic. Texas investigators, the FBI, and Secret Service all felt there was sufficient evidence to charge Oswald with the president's death. The Warren Commission used their material, plus additional witness testimony, ballistic tests, firing of the rifle, trajectory analysis, and forensic data conclude that Oswald fired 2 and probably 3 shots from the 6th floor window of the depository building, that 2 shots caused all the wounds to Kennedy and Connally, and that the suspect also killed Officer Tibbet. Conflicting witnesses' testimony about the number and origins of the shot, confusion over the location of the wounds, discrepancies in medical reporting, and skepticism that a pristine bullet could have caused wounds to both Kennedy and Connally led to immediate and continuous controversy about the validity of the Commission's findings and the authenticity of the evidence itself. The Clark Panel investigation of medical evidence in 1968 confirmed the number and origin of wounds, but relocated the head wound to entry point higher than the original autopsy report. This only fueled the controversy. 13 years of critical books, seminars, and public demand for a reopening of the investigation led to House Select Committee's examination in 1976 and 1978. Using highly scientific investigative procedures, some not available earlier in the Warren Commission, the House Committee upheld the Commission's findings that Oswald shot the president and governor from the 6th floor and occurred and 1 bullet wounded both men. The committee's medical panel found that the entry point of the president's back wound was several inches lower than the medical illustration that the original Warren report had indicated. Conspiracy. The Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone, killed the president. In 1978, the House Select Committee determined that Oswald's actions were part of a larger plot, but admitted that it could not identify any individual conspirators. In the interim, hundreds of conspiracy theories were offered by critics of the commission. Later, government-sponsored studies disputed the House Committee acoustical determination of a second gunman, thereby undermining the basis of a ruling of conspiracy. Groups and individuals placed under suspicion have included the governments of Cuba and the Soviet Union, pro- and anti-Castorites, organized crime, wealthy conservative American oil interests, right-wing and racist domestic factions, the U.S. military, the FBI, the CIA, the Secret Service, and the Dallas Police Department, government leaders, and aliens from outer space. Some critics argue that Oswald was not involved in the crime. Speculation about an Oswald double led to the exhumation of his body in 1981. The House Committee examined several conspiracy theories and concluded that the most likely conspirators were individuals in the anti-Castro movement or individuals associated with the organized crime. The committee criticized the Warren Commission and its investigative agencies for not looking more deeply into the issue of possible conspiracy, but found no American governmental involvement in a plot. In 1988, the Justice Department formally closed the House Select Committee investigation, citing no persuasive evidence of a conspiracy. Sites of tragedy. Dealey Plaza was recognized as a National Historic Landmark District on November 22, 1993, 30 years after the Kennedy assassination. A significant destination site for individuals around the world, it remains as a beacon for the curious, mournful, and thoughtful. Dealey Plaza is also an important marker in the history of violence in the United States and an early example of how sites of tragedy are transformed into powerful spaces that help visitors face the meaning of an event. Events such as the attack on Pearl Harbor, the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., the 1995 bombing of the Alfred P. Mora Federal Building in Oklahoma City, and the terror attacks of September 11, 2001 are cultural touchstones that create bridges of understanding between generations. The sites of these tragedies maintain a powerful significance and become opportunities to explore themes of violence, justice, and recovery. Some specific bequests. After the assassination, President Lyndon B. Johnson took on John F. Kennedy's legislative package and worked to have it pass in Congress. Over 50 of Kennedy's bills passed the House, and the vast majority made it through Senate. In all, more than 200 bills, including Kennedy's, passed the Congress under Johnson's initiative. Major accomplishments include the tax cuts, civil rights legislation, the Mass Transport Act, Medicare, the Housing Act of 1965, and significant welfare programs. The 25th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified in February 1967, addressed the issue of presidential stability and succession. Leaders of both houses of the Congress stated publicly that the New Frontier programs would have passed eventually, but historians attribute the remarkable completion of the Kennedy program in part to the assassination and to Lyndon B. Johnson's outstanding talents at congressional negotiation. Advances in civil rights for blacks during Kennedy and Johnson era encouraged other minority and ethnic groups to lobby and demonstrate during later in the 60s and 1970s for affirmation of equality under the Constitution. Kennedy's philosophy of using induced deficits to encourage domestic fiscal growth became a mainstay of American government under later administrations, both Democratic and Republican. John F. Kennedy's rhetoric generated high expectations among many people, and his death led some to condemn the slow pace of the establishment liberalism and to form the political New Left, epitomized by the Students for Democratic Society, SDS, and the Youth International Party, or Yippies. Many in the counterculture ignored politics entirely and sought to relive the complexities of a technological society through rock music, experimentation with drugs, and a general denunciation of materialism. Both the New Left and the counterculture were agitated by the war in Southeast Asia, which continued to escalate after John F. Kennedy's death. So that's a, a tour of the Sixth Floor Museum. I hope you enjoyed this virtual tour, and if you ever get a chance to visit Dallas, it's a really interesting museum and space to visit. Check out some of my other travelogue videos, and I hope you enjoyed this and you found it informative. Have a great day.